I'm Cheyenne, and I have mast cell activation syndrome. There are numerous types of mast cell diseases. There is mast cell activation syndrome, like what I have, and that is where there is a normal number of mast cells in the body, but they behave badly and they are triggered very easily. They cause allergic and non-allergic symptoms when exposed to different foods, temperature changes, hormonal fluctuations, perfumes, colognes, lotions, cosmetic products, exercise. There is also mastocytosis. And mastocytosis is when there is an abnormal number of mast cells in the body. There is cutaneous mastocytosis, which is confined to the skin. There are too many mast cells in the skin and it creates spots or lesions. There is also systemic mastocytosis. It causes systemic symptoms all over the body, just like mast cell activation syndrome, from having too many mast cells. And these mast cells, when looked under a microscope through a bone marrow biopsy or a organ biopsy, such as your gastrointestinal tract, these mast cells will often appear aggregated or clumped together, and they're often spindle-shaped. My mast cell disorder was actually diagnosed by accident. When I was 12 and 13 years old, my symptoms picked up. It was manifesting mostly as gastrointestinal distress. I was having diarrhea. I started getting nauseous over everything that I ate and having blackout episodes. And I was itching. Itching was the only allergic symptom that I experienced towards the beginning of my mast cell activation syndrome journey. And I was seeking medical care through a GI doctor because that was how my symptoms were presenting. I was not responding to any of the medications. The heartburn and reflux that I was having was off the charts. I was in the 95th percentile when they did the pH probe. I was on massive doses of proton pump inhibitors, which are medications that block acid. So they finally decided to scope me. And when they scoped my intestines and my colon, they found too many mast cells there. However, the mast cells looked normal under the microscope. They were not spindle-shaped or aggregated in clumps. When my results came back, the GI doctor said she didn't know what that meant or how or why it was tested for, but that the diagnosis on the report said mastocytic enterocolitis, which is colitis caused by too many mast cells. So you would think that because there's too many mast cells in an organ, that I would have systemic mastocytosis. So immediately I was sent for more testing. They checked what they call a tryptase level. Now, tryptase reflects the overall mast cell burden. So when you have too many mast cells in your body, systemically, that tryptase is going to be elevated more often than not. And my tryptase came back. It was a 2. They're like, you can't have systemic mastocytosis. So we just chalked it up to mastocytic enterocolitis, and I went on about my way. I still was taking a Zyrtec daily because I was having seasonal allergies and itching. And I went ahead and had a Nissen fundoplication for the reflux because my doctor said I would likely develop throat cancer because I was treatment refractory. I was eventually diagnosed with gastroparesis that same year. And gastroparesis is common with mast cell disorders. It is when the stomach is partially paralyzed and it doesn't contract to move food through. I was also diagnosed with POTS, and that is malfunctioning of the autonomic nervous system. So when I stood up, my body could not regulate my blood pressure or heart rate, and that's why I was fainting and having blackouts. We were trying to look more into why I was losing weight, even though it was likely because of the gastroparesis and I couldn't eat hardly anything, but that's beside the point. I was sent to the Mayo Clinic. And while I was at the Mayo Clinic, my pediatrician had called my mom, and she was asking all of these random questions, like, does Cheyenne have flat feet? Did she have dental issues with a high narrow palate? Was she double jointed? And my mom was answering yes to all of that. My pediatrician was saying, I think I figured out what was wrong with Cheyenne. Like, she has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It is associated with POTS, gastroparesis, and mast cell problems. And it was after her finding out that I had EDS that we put it together that what I was experiencing with the mastocytic enterocolitis and the itching and some of my other symptoms, that was me presenting with the mast cell problems, with mast cell activation syndrome. They didn't even bother doing mediator testing at the very beginning with my pediatrician because it wasn't really going to change my treatment at that time. I was not having severe reactions. We didn't realize at the time that the extent of my symptoms that were mast cell related, we were pawning it off on other things. I was seeing an autonomic specialist to see if they could help me with my dysautonomia. And because I was suffering from insomnia and chronic pain, because that is around the age I also developed widespread bone pain. I was 14 then, and they put me on a drug called doxepin. It is an antidepressant, but it was being used to help with sleep and pain. And so I would take a low dose before bed, and that would help me sleep through the night. But I noticed that when I skipped a dose of my doxepin, I would be up at night crying from this deep, throbbing, aching bone pain. And it turns out that doxepin has antihistamine properties. That's why it was helping with the bone pain, because although I had EDS, or have EDS, the majority of my pain was coming from mast cell. Fast forward to later in my life, I realized that a lot of my pain also responds to IV Benadryl. While EDS is a very painful condition, and many of the other chronic issues that I deal with are very painful, the bulk of my pain seemed to be derived from mast cells going haywire. Weasley, what are you doing? I did not have my first full-blown mast cell reaction until I was actually 16. They thought I could have mitochondrial disease because it is associated with hypermobility, with like the EDS, and all of my other secondary diagnoses. I was undergoing the muscle biopsy for that, and it was out of state, so they didn't do my normal anesthesia protocol. They used nitrous oxide and to calm you down before surgery because it was in peds instead of Versed. I started hallucinating, which is probably just a weird side effect. But when I woke up after receiving the nitrous oxide, my lips were swollen, my pulse was in the 150s. Like I said, I had been hallucinating. My temperature dropped to 94 degrees. I was just shaking. But it never happened again like that until one day when I was 17 years old. I had just turned 17. I took a medicine, my doxepin actually, like I always had before. And because I was on such a low dose, I dumped half the powder out. Some of that powder spilled out into the sensitive mucosal areas in my mouth, and immediately I was in a reaction. But we didn't realize it was a reaction. I was like shaking uncontrollably. My pulse was racing. I was dry heaving. And I knew something was wrong. My mom called the pharmacist, and the pharmacist said that should not have caused what was happening to me. And I was in that reaction for over an hour, and then I started flushing. And then my mom put two and two together, like, oh, she's turning red. That's a reaction. And so they gave me Benadryl through my J tube, because I had a feeding tube then, and then it took it away until the next time I put something else in my mouth. And I started having those severe reactions each time I did anything. I could no longer do my tube feeds. As soon as I would start them, I'd go into an allergic reaction. I would drink this water, allergic reaction. I would take my other medications, allergic reaction. And I was going from ER to ER to ER because I did not have a central line at the time. But each reaction was getting worse and worse until I ended up inpatient. I could not tolerate anything. It was bad. Like, my pulse was getting over 200, and the arrhythmias, it was just bad. It was my anaphylaxis, which is a severe allergic reaction consisting of 3 body systems or more, and it can be life-threatening. At that time, I didn't have a lot of swelling. It was mainly what was so severe about my reactions back then was the cardiac involvement. And we had even had testing showing that when my mast cells were triggered, I was very close to having a heart attack. I had myocardial ischemia show up. I was actually airlifted to a different hospital that was more equipped to handle the situation. And then I went 3 months on TPN. They gave me complete gut rest after hitting me very hard with the IV steroids. And I was doing all IV medications, IV Benadryl around the clock, IV Pepsid or famotidine. And that was how I was controlling things. So the complete gut rest did get everything under control because my reactions seemed very much like they were triggered through my gut, because every time I would put something in there, I'd go into anaphylaxis. We just wrote it out in that 3 months, long months. So I did some research, and people were having success with this low histamine diet. So I looked up the low histamine chef. I bought all her ebooks, and I was ready to get these recipes going. If only it were that easy to just follow a recipe and your mast cells will be good to go. That's not the way it went for me. But I went raw vegan, and I had a good 10-month spell with what I was doing. Anytime I ate anything out of a package, I would either go into anaphylaxis or all my symptoms would come back. I would start having blood sugar issues again. I would be very fatigued. And if you watch my other videos, you'll know this, but I had a full ride to college. I was doing very well. All of a sudden, things went downhill. I started reacting to all my medications again. I was back in the hospital when it was June 6th, 2015. We tried my regular protocol, the gut rest and high dose steroids and IV medications instead, and it wasn't working this time. All my previous flares, I had been able to make a connection of what triggered that cascade. But this time it was different. I don't know. I went to go get some things for my new dorm with my mom. I was driving. I went into the dollar store and I kind of felt bad, but whatever. Then we made it into Walmart, and I walked by the chicken aisle where they were doing the rotisserie chickens, and my throat felt funny and I was feeling short of breath. And then my mom went to Chipotle. I didn't tell her I wasn't feeling well. I had stopped taking my meds because I just kept reacting to them. So I literally had nothing on me. I got back in the car. I really didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I'm like, okay, maybe it'll pass on its own, what have you. So I went to Chipotle, and then Selena wanted some Chipotle while he was at work. My mom was eating her Chipotle in the car while I'm driving, and chicken has been one of my worst triggers. And I went into Sylvina's work to give him his Chipotle, and they had candles. He worked at a reception hall that did weddings and events, and normally it's been really safe. And of course, the one day I'm a Hot Mess Express, they had candles lit, and it got me. By the time I got in the car, I was just feeling the impending doom that you get before a mast cell reaction comes on. I was in the hospital that night, and I was admitted for a couple weeks. They discharged me with a PICC line to do the stuff at home. Every few weeks after that, I was back in the hospital because we could not get things under control. We were trying different treatments. The nebulized cromolyn sodium, my pharmacist and doctor, and myself, we all agreed that would be a good option to try because I could no longer tolerate the oral cromolyn, and that was a way to get a mast cell stabilizer in me without having to use my gastrointestinal tract. So I tried that, and no bueno. A major reaction there. They discharged me for another week. I couldn't make it more than 2 weeks at home.